Okay, I need to say something, and I don't think enough people are talking about this. I was in Walmart last week, just grabbing the usual stuff, and I noticed something that stopped me in my cart. Certain shelves looked thinner than normal. Not empty, just thinner. The kind of thin you only notice if you shop the same store every single week. So I started paying attention. I started checking prices. I started watching what was moving fast and what wasn't restocking the same way it used to. And what I found kind of freaked me out, in a good way, because now I know something most shoppers walking in there today don't. This isn't about panic. This is about being the person who sees it coming, instead of the person who shows up in September wondering why their favorite item is suddenly $5 more, or just gone. Stick around, because number 7 on this list is the one that genuinely surprised me the most. I did not expect that one at all. And before we get into it, if you're the kind of person who likes knowing things before everyone else does, go ahead and subscribe. This channel is for people who pay attention. Let's get into it. Item number 1. Name brand coffee. Coffee is always the first thing I check because coffee prices move fast and nobody really talks about why. Global coffee costs have been climbing for months now, driven by weather problems in the major growing regions and shipping costs that never really came back down after everything that happened the last few years. Retailers eventually pass that along. It just takes a little while to show up on the shelf. Industry reporting on commodity pricing has flagged coffee as one of the categories most exposed to this kind of squeeze heading into fall. And grocery buyers have said as much in trade coverage. Here's the thing. I drink the same brand every morning, same size bag, and I check the price out of habit now. Last month it crept up again. Not dramatically. Just enough that I noticed, because I always notice with coffee. I also noticed the store brand next to it hadn't moved nearly as much. If coffee is part of your routine, this is the month to stock the pantry a little heavier than usual. Grab an extra bag or two if your budget allows, keep it sealed and in a cool, dark cupboard, and don't feel weird about buying store brand as a backup. It stretches further than people think. This is one of those small things that adds up fast if you're not paying attention. Protect the little routines. They matter more than people admit. Item number 2. Butter. Butter is one of those items that quietly tells you a lot about where grocery prices are headed, because dairy responds to feed costs, fuel costs, and herd size faster than almost anything else in the store. Dairy analysts have been pointing to tighter supply this year, and butter specifically tends to see price movement before milk and cheese catch up since it's more sensitive to production shifts. I actually spoke with someone I know who works in food distribution, and they mentioned that butter has been one of the categories retailers watch closely this time of year, because demand always ticks up once fall baking season gets closer. Combine that with tighter supply, and you get a product that moves in price faster than people expect. When I checked last month, a pound of butter at my local store was noticeably higher than it was in the spring. Not shocking on its own, but paired with everything else, it stood out. If you bake, or you just go through butter regularly, this is a smart month to buy an extra block or two and toss it in the freezer. Butter freezes beautifully for months. Wrap it well, and you're covered well into the holidays. Small moves like this protect your budget without you having to think about it later. Item number 3. Canned tomatoes. This one feels boring until you actually think about how much you use canned tomatoes. Sauce, chili, soup, pasta night. It's everywhere in a normal week. Agricultural reporting this year has pointed to a tighter tomato harvest in some of the major growing states due to heat stress, and that tends to ripple into canned goods a few months later, once processors work through existing stock. Grocery trade publications have flagged canned goods broadly as a category worth watching this fall, since packaging and transport costs haven't eased much even as some raw ingredient prices have. I only started paying attention to this because I make chili every single week, and I buy the same 6 cans every trip. I noticed the price per can creeping up gradually over the last couple months. Nothing dramatic in one trip, just steady. Canned tomatoes last a long time on the shelf, so this is a genuinely low-risk item to stock up on. Grab a few extra cans this month, rotate your pantry so older cans get used first, and you'll barely notice the difference later when prices move again. This is the kind of item nobody thinks to stock up on, and that's exactly why it's worth doing. Item number 4. Frozen chicken. Frozen chicken is one of those staples that a huge number of households rely on every single week, which means even small price shifts here hit people's budgets hard. Poultry pricing has been affected this year by feed costs and by periodic disease outbreaks in flocks across different regions, both of which reduce supply without any dramatic headline moment. It just shows up gradually at the register. Retail analysts covering protein pricing have noted that chicken tends to lag behind other proteins in price adjustments, meaning increases often show up later in the year rather than all at once. I buy chicken breast in bulk pretty much every trip, and I started tracking the per-pound price a few months ago, just out of curiosity. It has crept upwards steadily, and the family size packs specifically seem to be where I've noticed it most. If you have freezer space, this is a smart month to stock up on family size packs while you can portion and freeze them yourself. Break it into meal-sized bags before freezing so you're not thawing more than you need later. This one matters because chicken is such a weekly staple for so many households. Small savings now add up fast over a full year. Item number 5. Olive oil. Olive oil has quietly become one of the more expensive pantry staples over the past couple of years, and most people don't realize how much of that comes down to weather in the Mediterranean, not anything happening domestically. Drought conditions affecting major olive-growing regions have reduced yields multiple years in a row now, and that kind of supply pressure takes time to work its way out of the system, even when a single harvest improves. Trade coverage of specialty oils has repeatedly named olive oil as one of the most volatile grocery categories of the last few years, with pricing that swings well beyond typical grocery inflation. I use olive oil constantly for cooking, and I remember when a bottle used to feel like a minor purchase. Now I actually plan around it. When I checked prices last month, the gap between name brand and store brand had gotten wide enough that I switched. And honestly, I couldn't tell much difference in my cooking. If olive oil is a staple in your kitchen, this is a good time to buy a slightly larger bottle than usual while shelf stock is available, and to seriously consider a store brand alternative for everyday cooking, saving the good stuff for finishing dishes. This is one of those categories where a small adjustment in habits protects a real chunk of your grocery budget over time. Item number 6. Store brand. Cereal in general has had a rough couple of years, but store-brand cereal specifically is where I've noticed the most interesting shift, because it's usually the category people rely on to save money. Grain and packaging costs have stayed elevated even as some other food categories have cooled off, and store-brand products, which run on thinner margins to begin with, tend to feel that pressure differently than name brands do. Retail industry commentary has noted that private label grocery items, while still cheaper than name brands overall, have seen some of the sharpest percentage increases recently, simply because they started from such a low price point. I switched to store brand cereal years ago to save money, so I've watched this price closer than most people probably do. It's still cheaper than the name brand box next to it, but the gap has narrowed more than I expected. If cereal is a household staple, this month is a reasonable time to grab a couple of extra boxes, especially if your store runs any kind of stock-up promotion. Cereal keeps well if sealed properly, so there's little downside to buying ahead. This is one of those quiet shifts that catches people off guard, because store brand is supposed to be the safe, predictable option. Item number 7. Bagged ice and frozen novelties. Okay. This is the one I mentioned at the start, and I genuinely did not expect it. Late summer is peak season for frozen treats and bagged ice, which means retailers price them aggressively to move volume before demand drops off with cooler weather. What surprised me is that this creates a short window where prices on these items are actually lower than they'll be again until next summer. Seasonal retail pricing patterns consistently show a dip in frozen novelty and ice pricing in the final weeks of summer, right before shelf space gets reallocated to fall products. I only noticed this because I grabbed a box of popsicles for my kids last week without thinking about it, and it was noticeably cheaper than what I paid back in June. I went back the next day and checked a few other frozen items, and the pattern held up. If you've got freezer space, now is actually the time to stock up on ice cream, popsicles, and similar frozen treats, not avoid them. Prices tend to climb again once retailers shift shelf space toward fall and holiday items in September. This is the opposite of most of what we've talked about today, and that's exactly why it caught me off guard. Sometimes the smart move is buying more, not less. Item number 8. Bottled water and sports drinks. Bottled water and sports drinks follow a similar late summer pattern to frozen treats, but for a slightly different reason. Retailers stock up heavily for peak summer demand, and by late August, they're often trying to clear that inventory before demand naturally drops. Beverage industry pricing tends to be highly promotional in the final weeks of summer, with multi-packs and case discounts appearing more frequently than at any other point in the year. I stock up on case packs for my kids' sports practices every summer, and I've started timing my purchases around late August specifically because I noticed the deals get better right before school schedules fully kick in. If you go through bottled water or sports drinks regularly, this is a good window to grab a few extra cases while promotional pricing is active. Store them somewhere cool and out of direct sunlight so quality holds up. This is a small one, but it's an easy win, and easy wins matter when you're trying to stretch a budget. Item number 9. Ground beef ground. Beef is one of those items where the price story has been building for a while, and most people have started to notice it even without following the details. Cattle herd sizes in the US have been at some of their lowest levels in decades, largely due to drought conditions in ranching regions over recent years that made it harder and more expensive to maintain herds. Fewer cattle now means tighter beef supply for a while, regardless of what happens with demand. Agricultural economists covering livestock markets have pointed to this herd rebuilding process as a multi-year issue, not something that resolves in a single season. I go through ground beef constantly for weeknight dinners, and I've watched the price per pound climb steadily over the past year in a way that felt different from normal grocery inflation. It wasn't one big jump, it was just consistently upward. If ground beef is a staple for your family, this is a reasonable month to buy in bulk when you see a sale, portion it into meal-sized packages, and freeze it. Vacuum sealing, if you have access to it, will extend quality even further. This is one of the bigger budget items for a lot of households, so getting ahead of it matters more than some of the smaller items on this list. Item number 10. Peanut butter. Peanut butter doesn't get talked about much, but it's one of those pantry staples that a huge number of households depend on weekly, especially with kids in the house. Peanut crop yields have varied significantly in recent growing seasons due to weather conditions in major peanut-producing states, and that variability tends to show up in pricing with a delay, since processors work through existing inventory before adjusting. Commodity trade coverage has noted peanut pricing as more volatile than people generally assume, given how stable the shelf price usually feels to shoppers. I buy the same jar every couple of weeks for my kids' lunches, and I noticed a jump a few months back that made me start paying closer attention. It's leveled off since, but it hasn't come back down. If peanut butter is a staple in your house, this is a good time to grab an extra jar or two, especially the shelf-stable kind, rather than natural varieties that need refrigeration. It stores well, and there's basically no downside to having a backup jar in the pantry. Small staples like this are easy to overlook, but they add up fast in a household with kids. Item number 11. Paper towels and toilet paper. This one isn't about a shortage. I want to be clear about that up front, because that word gets thrown around too easily, and it's not what's happening here. This is about pulp and packaging costs, which have stayed elevated due to ongoing transportation and manufacturing expenses. Paper goods are heavy, they're bulky to ship, and those costs get passed along more directly than people realize. Retail pricing trackers have shown steady, gradual increases in household paper goods over the past year, distinct from the sharper spikes seen in some food categories. I buy the same bulk pack every month, and I've watched the per roll price creep upwards slowly but consistently. Nothing dramatic, just steady, the kind of increase that's easy to miss unless you're tracking it. If you have storage space, this is a reasonable month to buy the larger bulk pack instead of the smaller one, since the per unit price is almost always better, and to take advantage of any stock up sale your store runs. These items don't expire, so there's no real downside to buying ahead. This is about being smart with a predictable household expense, not about panic buying. There's a real difference. Item number 12. Store brand snack. Item's last one on the list, and this is a pattern I've noticed building over the last few months, specifically with store brand snacks, chips, crackers, that whole aisle. Packaging and ingredient costs have pushed even private label snack pricing upward this year, narrowing the gap that used to make store brand snacks such an obvious choice over name brand. Retail category reports have flagged snacks broadly as one of the more inflation-sensitive aisles in the store, with private label products no longer as insulated from price increases as they used to be. I switched most of my snack shopping to store brand years ago specifically to save money, so I check this category pretty regularly. The gap between store brand and name brand has narrowed enough lately that I've actually started comparing unit prices again, instead of just grabbing the yellow label out of habit. If snacks are a regular part of your grocery list, it's worth double-checking unit prices next time you shop, instead of assuming store brand is automatically the better deal. Sometimes a sale on name brand actually beats the everyday store brand price now. This is a small habit shift, but it's the kind of thing that keeps more money in your pocket without you having to think about it every single trip. So here's the pattern. If you step back and look at all 12 of these together, it's not one dramatic story. It's not a single shortage or a single company doing something shady. It's a bunch of small, quiet pressures: weather, fuel, packaging, herd sizes, harvest timing, all stacking up at the same time, and showing up gradually enough that most people never connect the dots. That's exactly why most shoppers won't notice until prices have already moved and the deal is gone. You're not most shoppers. You're paying attention now, which means you get to make small, smart moves this month instead of scrambling later. This isn't about fear. It's about being the person who's a little ahead of the curve, who buys the extra bag of coffee or the extra block of butter while it still makes sense, and who isn't caught off guard in October wondering what happened. That's really what this channel is about. Staying a step ahead, together. If this was helpful, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, because I've got more of this kind of breakdown planned. Drop a comment and let me know which one of these surprised you the most. I'm genuinely curious. And give this a like if you made it all the way to the end. It really does help this channel grow. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.